someone did something wrong.
We have common goals, we have common tools, we have common culture, but specialization still exists.
Graphic designers can really communicate information in a way that even dashboards are challenged to show.
Ein ganz anderes Niveau an Automatisierung erreichen. Hunderte Datenbankserver, hunderte Datenbankcluster verwalten und betreiben ohne Administrator heutzutage in der Cloud überhaupt kein Thema mehr.
No matter what you pick, the technology stack should really depend on your skills and what you want to do going forward.
Keine neuen Steuerelemente. Es sind kleinere Dinge, die aber trotzdem helfen, dass unsere alten Anwendungen auch an die moderne Zeit besser angepasst sind.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to DevOpsCon Berlin in this year. I'm glad to see so many of you here. I'm glad that so many of you decided to join us again. And I can promise you it's going to be some great days which we are all going to pass together in this building with you. First of all, please let me introduce myself. My name is Sebastian Mein, and it's my honor to guide you through the program. I work for SNS Media, the company behind this conference and many other conferences. And, well, I care together with my entire team for conference programs as well as for this conference here. But it's not only us at SNS Media working on that. Of course, it's a big advisory board, lots of really, really smart and intelligent people who helped us bringing together the program, helped us with new ideas, with the latest trends, with great connections to new speakers which join us for the first time at this conference. So these days, the entire world, now we need... Does the clicker work? Can we continue? Whoops. My clicker does not work. Okay, but, now it's working. These days, the entire world is obsessed with, so now we have a problem with the clicker, right? With the notion of digital transformation. It seems that everybody wants to talk about this, especially in German politics. Yeah, we speak about digital transformation, and I got the impression that the more we speak about that into business, it's hard work. It's hard work. And let me show this little video. For example, there is two examples of a pit stop. One is from 1981, and one is from this year, yeah, and maybe you've seen 2019. It's much faster, yeah, than in that time 1990. They're still working around a little bit on that. And the interesting thing is this: if you look to 1981, these guys are not dumb. They also probably have been smart guys, but they didn't know better, yeah. And if one would come to them and say, hey, we need to be faster by a factor of, I don't know, 10 or 100 or whatever, yeah, by doing that kind of pit stop, at that time, nobody would have any clue how to do it, because there is no path, there is no predefined way how to achieve that. In the end, it's just about, let's say, the constant will to change things. It's the constant will to rethink things. It's a constant will to try everything out, and finally, well, this is about 40 years, but finally you end up by speeding up things very dramatically. And that is all about. There is no predefined path between the two different states we see here, but the end result, of course, is impressive. There's no single recipe, as I just said, and of course, digitalization or digital transformation is not only doing the same thing as we did in the past and just add some fancy tech over there. Maybe we add an iPad to schools, or maybe we let fly around some drones, or we just use Kubernetes because it's cool and fun. It's really about having a deeper understanding about the constant interplay between technology and the potentials latest technologies are delivering to us on the one hand, and on the other hand, of course, organizations, how they are working, how you organize inside of larger or maybe our mid-sized organizations, the constant process of learning, of observing, of understanding, and of course, if necessary, of changing. Having said this, I just want to mention the tracks we have here on the conference, because in the end, at this conference, it is constantly about what I call the interplay between the potentials of latest technologies on one hand, at this conference mainly infrastructure technologies, of course, and on the other hand, the impact which all that can have on organization, and vice versa, the support of which the technologies can provide if organizations decided we want to do it differently than we did in the past. So on the one hand, you see lots of technical tracks, but let me also point out this track. This is about business and company culture. You find there lots of, let's say, case studies. It gives you interesting insights how companies found their way to change in some way. And we also got a track on organizational change. Here again, we have lots of examples and lots of advices how to find a way, step by step, doing smaller projects, try something out, try to learn, try to measure what happens if you change something, if this is the right way for you or your organization or not, on all these things. And last but not least, I'd also like to underline something new, which we started with the DevOps conference in Munich last December, the slideless track. This is then, again, this is deep technology, and as the term says, this is slideless. You go there to presentations which don't have any slides. It's all about live coding, live working with code on the command line and showing stuff which really works on that level. So it's going to be something exciting, and it's also something very exciting also for the speakers, because this is really hard, because things can go wrong. But that's a challenge, and we really appreciate if you visit the sessions from the track #slideless. Yeah. Having said that, it's now my pleasure and an honor to announce our very first keynote. I'm happy that Jeff joins us here with the DevOps conference. I think it's for the second time. He also joined other conferences we are doing before that. Well, Jeff is really an influential thinker on the DevOps movement. He cares about, let's say, service design. Yesterday, he delivered a workshop on user-centric IT infrastructure. He's a book writer. He's a well-known speaker. And I would just say, give him a hand. Give a warm welcome to Jeff Sussna.
Thanks, Sebastian. It's very nice to be back in Berlin, and especially to be in the only air-conditioned building in Berlin. I feel very fancy this morning. I promise this is non-alcoholic. Or maybe they switched it on me, I don't know. So my perspective on DevOps is a reflection of my personal background, which is 30 years of building systems and leading organizations across the entire development, QA, and operations spectrum. So you could say that I have the perfect DevOps resume, but it was 10 years ago now that I discovered two things simultaneously that have profoundly impacted my approach to my work. The first was design thinking, and in particular service design, which is the idea of applying design principles to the design of services, whether it be a software service or something like an air hung. And the second was cloud computing. And when I put those two together, I realized that when you look at modern approaches to IT, whether it be IT as a service or infrastructure as a service or software as a service, that service is central to everything that we do. And since then, I've built a consulting practice based in Minneapolis in the United States that's focused on helping both enterprises and software service companies address the particular challenges that come along with digital service, and in particular, the core challenge, which is how do we move fast without breaking things? And typically, clients come to me when they're trying to do something new and it's not going the way they expected. And so they ask me, well, what are we doing wrong? How do we do it right? And in order to do it right, we need to take a step back and we need to understand what it is we're trying to accomplish in the first place and how is it that this thing we're trying to do is supposed to help. When it comes to Agile, there's a tremendous amount of misunderstanding still, 20 years in, or however long it's been. Agile is not about speed. It's not about increasing velocity. It's not about sprinting. It's not about doing twice the work in half the time. The dictionary definition of agility talks about the effectiveness with which you can change directions. And so we need to understand that agility and speed are different things. In skiing, the best way to go fast is not to turn. Every course correction slows you down. I find it really fascinating that Lindsey Vonn, the winningest female skier in history, was really great at downhill and not very good at slalom, to the point where she actually stopped skiing it very much. Slalom, on the other hand, is about how early and smoothly and continuously you can turn or steer. Ingemar Stenmark, the winningest male skier in history, was brilliant at slalom and terrible at downhill. And so if we're just looking at it from the perspective of speed, when you look at agile ceremonies like stand-ups and sprint demos and retrospectives, they actually slow you down. Now, the problem with agile is that it talks a lot about delivering value, but it doesn't actually deliver anything. And this is an artifact of the 20th century product economy, where one organization would build software and then burn it on a CD, or God forbid, put it on a floppy disk, and hand it to a customer, and it was up to the customer to deploy and run it. But when software becomes service, the same organization that builds it runs it. And so you could say that DevOps is simply completing the agile steering equation. But again, we need to beware of misunderstandings. DevOps is not just release management 2.0. It's not just about how many times a day you can deploy to production. Imagine there's a new restaurant in town. You try it out on a Saturday night. You go to work on Monday morning. People ask you how it was. And you say, well, the food was great, but the service was awful. People will be less likely to try it for themselves because they view the food and the service as a single experience. So the reason that we took Dev and Ops and smashed them together into this one made-up word is because we realized that when software is service, functionality and operability are inseparable. Now, the most concise expression of DevOps I've encountered is the 3 ways of DevOps from the Phoenix project. The first and most familiar is flow, which is simply minimizing the friction involved with getting from having an idea to having that idea in production where customers can use it. But the second is feedback, which is getting information back from production about the quality and the relevancy of that idea. And it's when you put the two of them together that you develop the capacity for continuous steering and continuous learning, which is really the deepest purpose and meaning of DevOps. So what is it that happens when we learn? Well, what happens is that something internally changes in response to something that's happening externally. And that requires a level of internal flexibility and adaptability. So all of the new approaches that we're working with, all of the things that Sebastian put up on the screen in terms of the tracks, Agile, DevOps, Cloud, Containers, Microservices, 2-pizza microservice teams, are all about decomposing our systems and our organizations into smaller, more autonomous pieces that can change and come into and out of existence more quickly and fluidly. But we still have a problem. If all we do is shatter our systems and organizations into lots of little pieces, we risk replacing a few big silos with 1,000 little ones. We still need some kind of mechanism that will pull the pieces back into some kind of coherent whole, because what customers buy is service, not a bunch of microservices. And the good news is that the answer is right in front of us. The very thing that got us into trouble can get us out of it. Instead of treating components as disconnected pieces all going about their own business, we can treat them as mutual service providers. And that requires a shift in emphasis, outwards and upwards, away from ourselves and what it is that we're doing and what it is that we're making, and towards our internal and external customers and what they're trying to accomplish and how we can help them accomplish it. Now, in a bit of a poetic irony, the best definition of service that I've encountered comes from, of all places, ITIL, ITIL talks a lot about service design and operations and management, and it starts by trying to define service. And it does it with this wonderful phrase, which is facilitating desirable outcomes. And if you read the ITIL v3 introductory document, it actually goes so far as to give the example that what's important is not the CRM system that you build and operate. What's important is what the sales organization can accomplish with the help of that CRM system. Now, in DevOps, we like to talk about breaking down silos a lot and building these cross-functional product teams that are aligned with an entire end-to-end value stream. And that's wonderful. We should all do it. But where do those product teams deploy all of that wonderful value that they're releasing every day or every hour or every minute? Well, if it's a public cloud, that's the biggest silo in the history of IT. AWS won't even tell you exactly where their data centers are. If it's a private cloud, someone still has to run it. Someone has to make sure that there's fuel in the backup generators, that the network will scale, that that wonderful zero friction deployment platform that you depend on is up and running the way that it's supposed to. So no matter how you slice it, we still have to deal with relationships between different parts of the organization that have different roles and different needs and different perspectives. So it becomes service all the way down. Your company is a service provider. Your HR and IT departments are service providers. Your network and security and compliance teams are service providers. Your microservices and two-pizza microservice teams are service providers. At every level of the organization, your job is no longer just to do what you do, but rather it's to help each other create larger value, and by extension, to help your customers create larger value. And that means that optimizing for time to market or mean time to repair isn't enough. In order to help people, we have to understand their perspective. We have to understand what it is they really need help with. And that means that we also have to optimize for empathy, which is why we still say that empathy is the essence of DevOps. So what is this empathy thing? There's as much confusion about that word as there is about Agile and DevOps. Some people say that empathy means wallowing in someone else's pain. One well-known philosopher has declared that empathy is actually really bad. It's the source of all of humanity's ills, and we need compassion instead. Well, in my view, that represents a misunderstanding of both empathy and compassion, but that's a story for another day. But my favorite is the notion that psychopaths are really good at empathizing. And my answer to that is, if you have a psychopath on your staff, you have a much larger problem. DevOps and design thinking aren't going to solve it. You have an HR problem. I use a very simple and down-to-earth definition of empathy, which is the ability to see things as if from another's perspective. As a developer, a tarball and an email with manual deployment instructions might seem perfectly fine. But how does that look from the perspective of the ops person who needs to deploy and manage it? As an IT department, having to fill out 4 ServiceNow tickets and wait 40 days for a server might actually be the most efficient and cost-effective way to manage infrastructure. But what is the experience of the tester who needs to spin up a new swim lane in order to test a critical hotfix? I had a fascinating interaction with a network engineer not long ago who was frustrated because the marketing department was distributing printed marketing materials that had references to domains that they hadn't registered yet. And he threw up his arms and he said, "I don't know how they don't get this. It's just common sense." And without thinking, I blurted out, "Well, obviously it's not common sense because they don't do it." And he sat back in his chair and his eyes got big and you could see the gears starting to turn. And he started to figure out that not everybody thinks about things the same way that he does. The reason that we need empathy is because we need to pull together all of these different things across their differences. So, if empathy needs to become part of our daily work, how do we operationalize it? How do we turn it into something we can actually do and measure and improve in some kind of concrete way? Well, as is often the case, we can turn to the work of Mark Burgess, one of the deepest thinkers in the area of IT systems administration, the inventor of CF Engine, which is the godparent of Chef and Puppet and Ansible, and the whole idea of self-healing automated infrastructure, and the developer of a formal model for thinking about complex distributed systems called promise theory. In order to understand promise theory, you need to understand the basic idea of a promise. So imagine that you have asked your teenage son to clean his room, and he says, "I promise I'll do it before dinner." Okay, what just happened? Well, first he formed an intention. You didn't hold a gun to his head, you didn't threaten to take away the car keys, he decided to do it by himself. Secondly, he expressed that intention. He didn't stand there staring at his feet thinking, "I'll clean my room before dinner." Third, there was a level of intensity and commitment to his expression. He didn't say, yeah, I'll do it before dinner, don't bother me. He said, "I promise." And finally, he promised to do something that was of benefit to you. If he said, "I promise to sit in my room and play video games all night," well, that doesn't really do you any good. So we could define a promise as a strongly stated intention to facilitate a desired outcome. But we're still struggling a little with this word promise. What do we need that word for? What's wrong with contract or guarantee? Well, the interesting thing about promises is we don't always keep them. Sometimes we break our promises. And that's actually a really good thing because it forces us to account for the possibility of failure, which counterintuitively increases our chance of success. So now hopefully those of you who have or have had teenagers or who are young enough to remember what it's like to be a teenager will understand why I use that particular analogy, because you know that teenagers keep their promises about 50% of the time. So we need a refined definition here of a promise as an intended outcome that may or may not come to pass. And we can use promises to model all kinds of interesting things. Developers promise each other that they won't break the build. And guess what? They break that promise all the time. And as a result, they make another promise, which is, if I break the build, I'll stop what I'm doing and fix it. A website represents a promise to return pages within some number of milliseconds, regardless of load. And the only way to keep that promise is with an auto-scaling load balancer. A customer support organization might make a promise to answer the telephone within some number of seconds or minutes. And a cloud makes a promise to make it cost-effective for organizations to run resilient applications. And we can use promises to build continuous steering and learning into our work by asking ourselves a set of questions. What promises are we making? What benefit did we sign up to deliver anyway? Oftentimes when I work with clients helping them integrate this, they don't actually know what they're doing. They have all of these implicit promises, and it's really useful simply to figure out what they are. Secondly, how well are we keeping our promises? And finally, are they even the right ones to be making? Are we making promises we can't keep? Or should we be making bigger and more valuable ones? So when the various parts of an organization approach their work from the perspective of making and keeping and repairing and improving promises to each other, this serves as the magnetic force, if you will, that pulls them together into a coherent, customer-centered, service-providing organization without reintroducing the brittleness and friction that we were trying to get away from in the first place. Now, that's all good. We seem to have repaired DevOps in the face of what seemed like a bunch of silos we couldn't get rid of. But when you look at what's happening with things like cloud native, it's really easy to feel like things are going in the opposite direction, that everybody's kind of turning their faces away from each other. And this whole DevOps thing isn't really happening, right? Oh, you don't need to worry about that. Oh, you don't need to do operations. Oh, you're not even allowed to know what's going on under the covers. It's none of your business. Sometimes it looks like SRE is really the dreaded DevOps team that's been made okay again because we gave it a different name. So it's easy to wonder if DevOps was really just some kind of mirage. Maybe it was just a twinkle in Patrick Dubois' eyes, and it's kind of actually fallen by the wayside and been left behind. But the truth of the matter is that cloud native isn't about reintroducing silos. When you look at it, what's interesting about it, it is all built entirely on the idea of being focused around the benefit that it promises to the parts of the organization that uses it. So cloud promises the ability to scale infrastructure on demand. Platform as a service promises the ability to push code to production with a single command. SRE promises to help application teams achieve and maintain their desired SLOs. And serverless promises to let you forget that servers even exist. I think the truth of the matter, and why we really needed DevOps in the first place, is IT has actually always been a service business. And it's always been intended to be about making promises to the business and promises to the customers of providing value. But we lost our way somewhere along the way. And I think what happened is we started to get too focused on doing work. My job is to close tickets. My job is to move VMs around on a VMware farm. My job is to provision database instances. And we let all the mechanics of doing that work get in the way of actually having the connections with the rest of the organization that we needed. And so we needed DevOps, and then we needed all of these cloud-native techniques and platforms to actually reverse the focus and put it back where it belonged. Okay. So we're feeling good again, but there's still something bothering us in the back of our minds. Whatever happened to this notion of you build it, you run it? How does that work with all of these cloud-native platforms? Well, again, the truth of the matter that we have to confront is, to a certain degree, you can't run it. When you have all of these little product teams running around ordering their 2 pizzas, every one of them can't run its own network stack. It can't run its own database farm. It can't run its own cloud. But what we have to understand is that while we may not be operating infrastructure anymore, we may not be SSHing into servers, that doesn't mean that we're no longer accountable for operability. And I see a tremendous amount of confusion and a tremendous amount of unnecessary angst when the two are conflated in this unfortunate term of no-ops. If your Lambda functions are running slow, you are responsible for figuring out what to do about that. So when we evaluate cloud-native platforms or techniques or organizations, we need to look at them not just from the perspective of how fast, how seamlessly can we deploy stuff, but we also need them to help us observe and respond to and repair stuff, to fix our promises when we break them. So if we return to our definition of DevOps, and if we think about it in the largest sense that we can, because there's conversation now about the notion that DevOps is actually bigger than Dev and Ops. On the one hand, that presents us with a bit of a naming challenge. On the other hand, I think Sebastian was exactly right when he said that when you look under the covers at digital transformation, what you find under there is DevOps. So what is it that we find when we look under those covers in the biggest sense? What are the fundamental promises that DevOps requires or represents? Well, the first is to maximize flow and feedback. And this is everything that you do in order to turn or steer early, smoothly, and continuously. The second, which is one that I emphasize over and over and over again in conversations and with clients, is to learn from operations. What that means is that DevOps is circular. It's not linear. And finally, a promise to deliver service and not just software. Whether we're talking about design or operations, we need to think way beyond the boundaries of just pumping out features. We need to address the entirety of everything that impacts the customer experience and everything that makes up our interaction with our customers, whether they be internal or external. Yesterday, as Sebastian mentioned, I ran a workshop where we dug into promises and promise-driven design in a lot of detail. And during the morning, we were talking about new approaches to control and the idea that to some degree you had to give up control. And somebody asked a question. They asked me, well, what is it that replaces control if you give it up? And I said, hold that thought. I have a really good answer for you coming up next. And then I went and I rattled on about promise theory for about a half an hour. And I said, so does that answer your question? And he said, no, not really, not at all. I said, all right, well, explain more about what you mean. He said, well, we have the challenge in my domain where we're running a Kubernetes farm, and we want application teams to be able to customize their Docker images, but we don't want them to be able to create ones that are insecure. And then the light bulb went on. I think what replaces control really is empathy, because what we're talking about is switching from trying to prevent people from doing bad things, being the Department of No, as IT has become known, to helping people accomplish good things, where in this case, good things means both customization and safety. And so we have to view our work as what is it that people are trying to accomplish? What do they want to do? What might cause problems for them? And how do we help them to do that? You know, a dumb idea in this case might simply be something like you let people customize images, but you have a built-in auditing service that will audit that image when it gets built and detect insecurities and maybe notify them. And maybe if it's a simple enough one, maybe you just fix it for them. If you find a telnet server turned on, you turn it off. So in closing, I think what we're really talking about here with this whole DevOps thing, with this whole agile steering thing, is approaching our work at every level, from the infrastructure all the way up to the top of the business, from the perspective of continually asking ourselves, how can we be more helpful? Not, how can we do more stuff? How can we deploy more code? How can we buy shinier tools? But how can we be of greater service? So on that note, thank you very much. And if you're interested in learning more about service and promises and how that works, I've written a book called Designing Delivery, which is available on Amazon. You can get details at designingdelivery.com. I'd love to talk to you more about all of this stuff. So thank you very much. Enjoy your day and enjoy your conference.